Hello, welcome to another episode of Liticast. I'm John Robinson. Today we're being joined by Jared Correia. Am I saying that right? Correia?
Korea, like the country. Very close, though.
Correia. Welcome aboard. We are going to be talking about a lot of different topics today. First, we'll introduce our guest. Jared is a technology and management consultant for law firms. He's the CEO of Red Cave Consulting. He also has launched a chatbot platform called Gideon. You want to tell our guests a little bit about yourself?
Sure.
Other than
that, yeah, but it's all right. My kids can't even pronounce my last name. It's a weird one. I need a haircut, clearly, as you can see. I'm stuck in quarantine. I've been a business management consultant for lawyers for the last 12 years, focused on technology management, marketing, and financial management. Prior to launching my own company, I worked for the state of Massachusetts. We had a free program for attorneys in Massachusetts who would get consulting services from me and others for free. Ran that for about 9 years and then launched this business. Now I have a global private consulting company. And so I work with attorneys all over the world, frankly, as subscription consulting clients. And then I also utilize bar associations as well. So I'm the consultant for certain bar associations under contract. So that's pretty nice as well. I really enjoy working with bar associations. And then, as you mentioned, also get into software a couple of years ago. We have a chat bot called Gideon, which is coming out of beta in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So got a lot going on. And I'm homeschooling every day. So that's really fun.
Interesting times indeed.
For sure.
We were talking before we went live. I am lucky enough to be broadcasting in my bedroom where I can lock my bedroom door and my kids can stay out. It's also lunchtime, so that helps.
Yes.
But Jared may have some visitors joining in.
Wouldn't be the first time. My kids are not great at self-occupying.
So those of you who are watching us across the internet, we are live on Facebook Live. We're live on YouTube Live. We're live on LinkedIn Live. Please let us know where you're watching from. Feel free to bring up questions, comments. Jared and I will try to get to everybody's questions as much as we can during the time that we have today. If you'd like to be notified of future Liticasts that we have coming up, please keep up on our Liticast page. It's litify.com/Liticast, which we are also broadcasting live on. Subscribe on YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, the whole gamut. We've got some great episodes coming up this week. Tomorrow we'll be talking about document management. We have a charity event we're doing on Thursday, and we have a great lineup as well for next week with Michael Mogul of CRISP joining us next Tuesday, and some surprises coming up through the end of the month. So some great awesome conversations that we've had.
Tune in for that one. Mike is really good.
If anyone wants to take a look at what we've done in the past, we had a great episode last week with Utah Supreme Court Judge Dino Himones. That was a great episode. We're also trying to write recaps for those of you who can't catch these episodes live. You can always catch them after the fact. So Jared actually joined our Slack community recently. Those of you who would like to engage with us ongoing outside of these Liticasts, please go ahead and join our Slack community. You could also find that on litify.com. So let's get into it. Jared, why don't we talk about digital transformation? Let's start with, what is your definition of digital transformation in the legal sense?
I have a very low bar for lawyers. Lawyers are not quite digitally transformed yet. And what I've been telling people lately is it seems like it took a pandemic for law firms to get more digital than they were, which is unfortunate, but people are now moving toward it. And I think the challenge for a lot of law firms is they're kind of doing that in a truncated fashion now. So instead of taking 2 to 3 years to get more digital, lawyers are now needing to do that in 2 to 3 weeks. And that's been a real challenge. So I don't necessarily have a definition for digital transformation, but for me, the more virtual law firms can get in this environment, the better. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of law firms. They view that as a big hurdle. They're kind of concerned. They tend to do nothing when they're concerned. So a lot of law firms are still sitting on this. They're still in shock, but the time to get moving, frankly, is now. So I'm talking to a lot of law firms about how to get more digital, how to become more virtual, and how to operate online. Whereas most of the stuff they were doing before was offline, even some law firms that were pretty well advanced in terms of technology.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. Peter Coffey talked about this last week. specifically around the fact that we've really compressed innovation over the past 2 months, right? What we would expect within 5 years, we really have seen happen over the last 2 months. What over this period really has surprised you the most?
I'm surprised at the adoption of video conferencing, actually. I didn't think it would be this quick. So, like, I now know that my mom can use Zoom, and that is really surprising to me. And I also talked to a lot of older lawyers who are using it. So I think that was an underutilized technology for years. So I have people coming up to me and saying, like, I'm on Zoom meetings all the time. It's weird. And I'm like, welcome to my life. I do like 8 Zoom meetings a day. This is like what I've been doing for the last decade. So I think that's ultimately a good thing. But I think this adoption of video conferencing by attorneys, and also you're now seeing more and more software companies building in video conferencing, is, I think, ultimately a good thing, because that can be the analog for an in-person client meeting. And I think that also has ramifications beyond just this pandemic, right? And I've been telling people this too, like, I don't just think this stuff is a good idea now. I thought it was a good idea 10 years ago. So there are people who don't want to come into a law office and park in the city. I'm outside of Boston. It cost me $40 to park in town. Like, people don't necessarily want to do that anymore. So law firms that can give folks options in terms of intakes and meetings, like, that's a really valuable thing that I think has been underutilized by law firms for a long, long time.
Yeah, I don't even know if you're aware, but we actually did exactly what you're talking about. We added video conferencing into the Litify platform. It's been under a month at this point, right? We saw the need. And for those of you who are watching, Litify customers today can look at our product. It's called Uplink. We can add it on to your existing Litify platform, and you can launch video conferences directly from your practice management software.
That was kind of a softball for you, but yeah, check it out.
You did know.
I know. And I think it's great that you did that, by the way.
Thank you. Let's talk about intakes a little bit, right? You touched on it slightly.
Yeah.
How have you seen firms shift to how they're handling intakes now that we're in a remote environment, and how can they take it one step further?
Right. I think it's like a really big challenge for a lot of law firms. And I'm talking about like personal injury law firms as well. Some probably bigger than you would think. I think the issue has been that all these law firms have relied on like traditional intake for so long that it's a big shift for them to move. And if you look at it, like, there are analogs to all the things you're doing offline, online. You just need to find them. So I think there's 3 components of that, right? We talked about video conferencing. This is a great way to kind of authenticate people, get what would be an in-person meeting online. And there's also a lot of tools you can use. Like, you've got this great software here where you've got a lot of features. I talked about Zoom before. There's FaceTime, there's Wire, there's Signal, which is also secure video conferencing software. It's like, you can use those, annotate documents. It's functionally the same as showing somebody a document. But then you also have the other 2 pieces that you need to work on as well, which is the scheduling component, the payment component, and then the signature component. So 3 pieces, actually. So when you're building out a virtual intake from what was previously an in-person intake, those are the 4 components you need: the video piece, payments, signatures, and intake, scheduling. And a lot of law firms, they'll have none of those things set up. Some law firms will have 2 of those things set up. And now what you got to do is combine it and make it more of a flow than you have in the past.
Interesting. So how have you seen firms adopt all 4 of those? Or is there one that you've seen people focus on more and gain adoption on?
Yeah, I think, like, in terms of the most adoption of those 4 categories, I think video conferencing has been the most adopted as of now, like, in this pandemic period. I'm still shocked at how few attorneys use e-payments. And attorneys don't use e-payments because they don't want to pay the processing fees. But frankly, that's much better than sitting on tons of accounts receivable. And that's not maybe as valuable for a personal injury firm, but for a lot of practices out there, like family lawyers, for example, having the ability to take e-payments is essential. There's not a ton of adoption on that, not nearly as much as there should be. E-signatures, a lot of law firms have the software, but they don't use it, oddly enough. A lot of law firms have existing software that has e-signature features, or they already own something like Adobe and they have access to Adobe Sign, but they just never used it. So for a lot of people, it's like figuring out what the software is and then bringing it into that component. But like, the other piece of it that attorneys are not really using effectively at all is like the scheduling part of this. So it's still very hard to schedule with an attorney. Somebody calls a lawyer, they don't return the call, it goes to voicemail. Somebody emails a lawyer, they don't get back to people. You've got like a contact form on your website, those go into the ether. Nobody ever responds to those. So like scheduling with an attorney is still far more difficult than it should be. And there are tools out there that are relatively easy to use to get those appointments in place. But yeah, you need all four of those things. And theoretically, if you could get it as to one automation or flow, where some of those things happen automatically without the intervention of a human, that's where you want to be. So what percentage of law firms have utilized all four of those in combination? Probably a very small percentage, honestly. And I don't know if you see that, but that's at least been my impression.
So I want to dive into that a little bit. Why are you seeing firms potentially have e-signature capabilities but not using it? What is the roadblock if it is not the software?
I think the roadblock is awareness, right? So you've got a lot of law firms and they've got a lot of software. And I would say that at least the law firms I consult with, they're maybe using 10, 15% of the capabilities of every software that they have. So that's problematic because they're paying more than they're getting. And then what they'll also do is they'll go out and buy another platform because they don't even know their existing service does this. And I think the main issue is that lawyers are so focused on revenue and substantive work that they don't dive into the technology to the extent they should. I'm not saying a lawyer needs to be a programmer, but I'm just saying that lawyers should be aware of the software they're using and how their firm uses it. Because if not, they're going to end up overpaying and they're going to end up being less efficient than they could be. So just having a basic knowledge of this stuff, just enough to say, hey, I know this software does these 5 things, and now I'm going to turn it over to my staff to implement that. A lot of attorneys don't even go through step 1 of that, which is figuring out what the features of a software are, and they should.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. Too many softwares, right? You've got one software for e-signature, and you have another software for your practice management, and another software for your documents. And you're just continuously going out and buying another solution to solve a specific problem. It's not necessarily the best approach, right?
Right. And I know you guys are aware of this as well, but like, yeah, the more bang for your buck you can get out of a single overarching software is important. People have used productivity software that way for years, but there are components in a productivity software that don't allow you to fully manage the law practice. It's a different game. So you do need something to help you manage the practice. And the more features you can get into a system like that, the better. It's easier to manage one software system than 7. And most attorneys just choose to manage 7 because they don't have enough knowledge of what's out there and what's available.
Yep. We have some questions that are starting to come in. I want to pull some of these up here. This is a great one. So Tom says, can you talk about the integration of texting and sending of intake-related media, right? Going one step beyond texting for just communication to try to schedule and such, but specifically with regards to media.
Tom looks like a fisherman. Very nice. That's a good avatar. I like that. I'm jealous. Yeah. So in terms of like the texting piece of it, I think that's essential. And that is also underutilized by attorneys. Like if you look at texting, like that's where people are the most responsive. I know that if I need to reach somebody, whether it's a professional or personal connection, I'm going to text them because they're going to text me right back. And so what you're starting to see is technologies in place where you can text with clients. So there's 2 things you should be aware of there. Great way to push out intake materials, right? But you need to be able to do some things on the SMS stream. So you need to be able to have people sign those documents. You need to be able to have people making payments through that text chain. So if you can do those 2 things, you can do what I talked about before, which is automating these systems, bringing it all into one place, making your intake super efficient. That's part 1. Part 2 is that the problem that attorneys have had previously with texting is that, so I know a bunch of like criminal attorneys, for example, who will text their clients or potential clients like 3 a.m. and there'll be 7 or 8 texts and they have no way to save that. There's no way to manage it. And you could potentially get in serious trouble for that if you cannot reproduce the conversation that happened. So for lawyers, part of avoiding malpractice is getting everything squared away to an archive. And traditionally, lawyers were not great about archiving text messages, but now there are tools that actually allow you to do that. So one thing I would say is, yes, definitely use SMS for intake because it's going to be clients being more responsive. But number 2 is make sure that you have an archive of everything that takes place so you can have it in case something happens down the line. And a lot of attorneys are very excited about number 1, but not focused on number 2. I just think you have to have both components in place.
Yeah, texting is not only valuable from an intake perspective, but also like keeping that same text string to update your client on what's going on in their case post intake, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to do case statuses as well. Like the more SMS communication with clients you can do, the better. If what you're looking for is a response of some kind, they're just going to be more responsive.
What are your thoughts on client portals?
I like client portals, and I will say that largely the reason for that is security. It's convenient, obviously, but I see a lot of attorneys who are not doing a good enough job protecting the data they have. Small firms, big firms, they are not necessarily encrypting information they should. And part of that is because they want some level of convenience for their clients. So when I talk to smaller law firms, like one of the issues is they don't want to encrypt documents and send them via email because they don't want to send like a new password to somebody every time. Mm-hmm. It's a clunky process. They don't want to encrypt like 50 documents a day. It's just going to take away a ton of time. So being able to quickly click on a link or a file or a folder, share it with somebody, and then say, hey, you come in to access this document. That document or file stays encrypted because it's at rest. It's not actually moving anywhere as it does on email. Allows you to create a secure portal for people and also keep that document encrypted without moving it. And so for my money, it's really the easiest way to keep your information secure and to collaborate with both clients and colleagues, because the email option doesn't necessarily work, whether it's a document or encrypting your whole email. And like we talked about before, a lot of software is now offering client portals built into these other features that they utilize. So before you go out and try to buy a document archive system or a document repository where you can share information with clients, check out to see whether your existing law firm software has something like that. It likely does. So yeah, I'm pro client portals, but just before you buy something, figure out whether what you've got already has it in place.
Yep. And also make sure that they talk to each other.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, integration is a key thing, without a doubt.
There's so I see the client portals and the text messages and the emails and direct mail. It all has to be integrated, right? If you want someone to be able to get updated when something happens in real time, you've got text message capability, you've got email capability. But then to, as you mentioned, open up an email and push you to a client portal so you could then access a document, more of a self-serve, right? You kind of need to have both. Mm-hmm. Is there a step if a firm isn't doing anything beyond email or beyond, email and direct mail, right? The baseline. What's the first step that a firm can take into technology to bring the client experience into a more real-time or self-service environment?
Right. I think there's a lot of options, frankly. But if I was to pick one, I think what I would try to do is set up a scheduling tool. Again, that might be built into software you're using. That might be a separate software, but like allowing clients the ability to select their own appointments time, I think is really helpful. And the reason for that is if you look at the most law firm models are not engagement models, right? They're using intake systems that are easy for them to implement, not necessarily easy for the clients to use. So what you should be focusing on is like, what's easiest for the client? So how do you stop somebody from going to your website, bouncing off, and then calling the next attorney within like 2 minutes? The way you do it is you set up a scheduling portal of some kind, whatever it is, and they schedule an appointment. Somebody schedules an appointment with you for next Tuesday, they're probably not calling somebody else. So what that does is it allows you to have the first bite at the apple. Like you get to try to convince them to use your services before they go find somebody else. And I think that's, again, an extremely underutilized piece of intake for law firms and something that more and more law firms should be doing. And to your point, John, like the more you can bring that into your current intake system and automate these different pieces so that one action triggers another action, you're going to be so much more efficient. And that's really key now. If you look at the reason lawyers make money, especially like on the hourly billing side, the thing for them is being efficient because prices are fairly static. So the more efficient you can be, that's where you really make your money.
Yep. So let's give some tactical advice. What are some of the tools that lawyers can pick up and start using today to handle their scheduling? Okay, scheduling.
I think you've got like the players that have been in the field for a while, right? Like Calendly is a way to schedule tools. Acuity is a scheduling software. And the way a lot of these work is that you've you can set it up so it's on your website, right? You can click on a button, somebody can schedule an appointment. It feeds into your calendar. No fuss, no muss, right? There's another tool I really like, actually, which is kind of a hybrid between these two. So there's a program called X.AI out there. And what it does is it doesn't necessarily set up a scheduling tool on your website, but it's an AI assistant that will schedule with someone via email. So you may have people who want to schedule via email. They want to trade back and forth and set dates, but you don't want to necessarily do that because that's all of a sudden an 18 email thread. So what this will do is it'll allow you to name like an AI, and then your potential client or your client is having a conversation with someone who they think is named Rob, but is actually a robot. And then you get that calendar appointment scheduled and you don't have to worry about it. Those are just 3 tools, but there are tons more tools coming down the pipe as far as that's concerned.
Yep. And they sync directly to your existing Outlook or Google Calendar. Make sure that people don't double book. Right.
Yeah.
If you have a larger office, it can handle round robins or skill-based routing. You can get as advanced as you want to.
Yeah. Right? And just starting out, like I tell people, like if you've never done this before, just test it out. Like you can use Calendly, for example, set up a free account for one calendar and like see if your mom can schedule something, right? Like if I want to test this technology platform, my mom just turned like 68. I'm like, see if you can use this. And if she can, I know most people are going to be able to utilize it. But that testing period, we talked about that lawyers don't really dive into their technology. They definitely don't test their technology.
So with intakes being handled remotely for now, and your advice that they potentially should stay that way, or at least evaluate when things kind of turn back to normal.
Yeah.
View that as an option. How do you see questionnaires and screening evolving? Is there going to be a shift from call centers to potentially more of an online screening?
I think so. And I think what will also happen is you've got probably call centers that are going to be using online screening tools. So I think the screening piece is really important because if you've got like 100 clients coming in and only 10 of those are viable clients, if you can somehow pre-screen those people, I think that'll be really effective. So I think that's where messaging is going to come in across a number of platforms. And so as we talked about, I have a chatbot that we're building. And one of the things we try to do is triage clients effectively. So anytime you can create a triaging system, that's really important. So you want to have like labels and tags that you can aggregate so you can classify clients in a particular way. If you want them to hit 4 criteria, there's no reason you have to sit on the phone with them and talk through that 4 criteria with them. Sure. Like pre-screen them, get those criteria in place first so that you know that somebody you're talking to is a desirable lead. And that'll save you a bunch of time. That'll make you more efficient. That'll make you more money. But yeah, I do see those screening tools moving off of like an analog to more of a chat-based or messaging system. That's probably going to happen.
And someone's asking about the potential effect on success rate of sign up, screening online versus screening over the phone. Any feedback there?
So I'd say a couple things. So we were just talking about messaging, right? And if you look at the way consumers like to deal with brands, they prefer messaging, at least as the first option. So if I'm on any service provider at this point, I'm far less likely to pick up the phone than actually use a messaging portal of some kind. And there was a study that came out a couple of years ago that said like in the next 5 years, 9 out of 10 people, their first approach to a brand is going to be through a messaging portal of some kind. So I think this is getting to be the norm, right? And then the other piece of it is if we're talking about like a first blush intake, generally speaking, it's not going to be an issue for people. The one thing you need to remember at the law firm is that you need to get some level of engagement. So if you can engage those people by getting them to take a next step of some kind, you're going to have that conversation with them. And then you get to try and close them at that point. So I think what a lot of lawyers focus on is step 2, which is closing that client, but they don't focus on step 1, which is educating somebody who's a layperson about how you communicate with a lawyer. So if somebody goes to a website, they can schedule an appointment with a law firm. They're far more likely to stick it out and see what that law firm has to offer before they go to another law firm. So, and anecdotally, like the service we use, so our chatbot schedules appointments with people. And so we've seen a high level of success with that. People are scheduling twice as many appointments via chat service and other methodologies, and they're converting more. So it is happening.
Yep. I think it's really important to note that you have a captive audience, right? Yeah. They're there. They're engaging with your brand in the moment.
Without a doubt.
The traditional form fill out, right? So you submit an inquiry, someone will get back to you. there needs to be the measurement of how many of those you actually do get a hold of, not how many you get a hold of that actually pass your screen.
Right.
Correct?
Right. I mean, because think of all the work it takes to get somebody to just land on your website. And then for law firms, like they're content to have somebody fill out a contact form and walk away, basically, with no next step in place. And that's what law firms have been doing for years and years and years. And I think that engagement model is changing. It's about to change, and it probably should have changed a long time ago. So yeah, your point is completely well taken.
So we've got a few minutes left here. I want to touch on one more topic before we run. How can you provide, or how can a firm continue to provide a high level of service and engage with their clients and meet their expectations without the brick and mortar in-person engagements that they've become used to?
Yeah. I think like there's an impression on the part of law firms that they need to be traditional, and that's what clients want. But largely, that's what law firms want, and clients don't need that anymore. So think of their interactions with like every other vendor or service provider that they used. Like if I'm a law firm, I'm trying to think about how do I become more like Amazon, not how do I become more like the law firm down the street. And I think law firms have looked at this question from the wrong perspective for a long, long time. And I think if you're going to be revising the way you work with clients, you want to be consumer driven, you want to be consumer focused, and you want to start adopting more technology through which you can communicate with clients in at least a couple of ways. One is you want to be able to automate some of those communications that you can automate, so you don't have to spend a lot of time with sending out like a basic notification, right? And the other piece of it is that you want to have the option to be able to allow people to reach you conveniently and easily on platforms that they want, and then engage a conversation if that's what they wish to have, right? I'm very much omni-channel in terms of marketing, in terms of client outreach. You don't want to be channel switching people. You want to give people access to you on their preferred platforms. And so all this stuff we talked about, the more tools you can utilize for that, the better. And if you can find one product that aggregates all those tools, even better.
Excellent. So we're going to close down here. We're hitting our 30-minute mark. I know, Jared, you have to run. Where can our guests catch you? I know you've got some upcoming events that they may want to tune into.
Right. Yeah. I do like a ton of presentations. So if you want to find me, probably the best thing to do, I'll give you 3 places. So my website, redcavelegal.com. That's my consulting website, redcavelegal.com. I said I have a chatbot product. You can find us at Gideon Legal, GIDEON.legal. And then lastly, like I'm fairly active on Twitter, and it's just my name at Jared Correia. And if you want to get a look at like the presentations I have upcoming, that's probably the best place to go. And a lot of those are free. So
excellent. It's been a pleasure having you as a guest on Liticast. We'll have to do this again soon. Thank you for joining us. Everybody who's tuned in, please, if you want to keep up to date on what's going on, upcoming shows that we have, it's litify.com/Liticast. Subscribe on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn, and we will see you tomorrow for our document management Liticast. Take care.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody.